Hey my glam girls, welcome back to my channel. It's Chelsea, where we talk about all things glam and all things girly. I'm a beauty consultant who loves to talk about everything dealing with beauty and makeup, and today, finally, we are talking about the new NATASHA DENONA Retro Glam Palette. I got some thoughts, you guys, and I cannot wait to share them with you all. So stay tuned for how I'm creating both of these eye looks. I'll be showing you swatches, my thoughts, all the things, so stay tuned for all of that. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I truly do appreciate it, and let's get right into this video. So thank you to NATASHA DENONA for sending over her new Retro Glam palette. I had actually purchased the palette when it came out, and then I got home last Monday and there was a package, and I was like, well, thank you. So excited to have it. So I went on ahead and canceled my order, and here we go. So if you have not seen it, I'm pretty sure you have, because just as an FYI, I was sick all last week, so that's why my video did not go up in a timely manner. So we're talking about it today. So hopefully this video still interests you or answers the questions that you might have about this palette. So here is NATASHA's Retro Glam palette. We are dealing with all new shades in this palette. So let me take the pamphlet, and she says that this is bringing two of NATASHA's most celebrated creations into a new midi-sized eyeshadow palette concept. This dynamic color story combines the greens, pinks, and neutral nudes of the mini retro eyeshadow palette with a variety of seductive glam eyeshadow palette finishes in a collection of all new shades. So, if we need reminders, here was her mini, or is her mini Retro Glam palette. So remember, she came out with this one, like a year or two ago. And then of course, one of her most loved palettes, her Glam eyeshadow palette. So she's taking concepts from both of these palettes and put it together to create, get myself together, this one. So let's get into the formula. So we do have one of her cream matte shades, and that is going to be this shade right here. And then the rest of the shades are going to be traditional matte shades or metallic shades. So getting into the eye looks that I created today, I will be honest and say that for this eye look here, I was inspired by the look of this particular look that she has on this model. This was the pamphlet that came with her PR package. I loved the concept of it, the subtleness of the shimmer, and you know, kind of working with some open space here, or I should say some negative space here. So that is the inspiration for this eye look. So I started off with this shade Fringe, which is one of her traditional matte shades. Put that in the transition area, and then went in with this shade called Sage, another regular matte shade, traditional matte shade. And I would say that the matte shades in this palette, they are kind of dusty, a little powdery, but the pigmentation is nice. It is a buildable formula. So with the shade Fringe, I was able to build up that shade to my liking. It took me a few applications to get it to where I felt like I could see it, but I was able to build it up. Sage definitely has more depth to it, so I didn't have to build this shade up too much, or as much as I had to build up Fringe to get the pigmentation that I wanted. And then I went in with the cream matte shade, and I put that directly into the crease. This shade applied beautifully, in my opinion. The formula was very smooth, easy to work with, and I quite enjoyed it. So then after that, I went in with this shade called Jazzy. This is a metallic shade, and I used that to form this outer wing. I applied it on the lower lash line and just brought it all the way around. And then I applied it about halfway up across the lower upper lash, and then just fanned it out a little bit to create a wing here. And I will say with the metallic shades in this palette, specifically, I would say Jazzy, Maxi, Oz. I didn't use Flare. This was the only shade in the palette I didn't use today. Sorry, you guys. But I would say with these metallic shades, what I do like about them is that although they are metallic, they're not chunky, they're not crumbly. And so using it even in areas where I traditionally use matte shades, like the outer corner of the eye, to add depth. I don't feel like I'm just getting a crumbly mess on the eyelid. So I do like that about the formulation. So then after I went in with the shade called Jazzy, I took the shade called Oscar right here. That's another metallic shade. And I applied it right along here and just blended it into Jazzy. Then I wanted to figure out what are we gonna do with this negative space here, because I did like the negative space, but according to this picture here on the pamphlet, there is some just like ever so lightly dusted shimmer across the eye. So I went in with the shade called Marlin, which is a metallic shade, and I literally just dusted it across the matte shades that I created for the transition and the crease. And I just took my flat shader brush and literally like tapped it across that area because I didn't want to override it. I still wanted you to see the matte shades, but I did want to create like this shift of like highlight that you see. And it's intense, like it is an intense shade. You do not need a lot of it to get high impact, high sheen. So that's what we have there. And then I went in with Palladium right here. That is a more icy metallic shade. And I took a fluffy brush and I literally like dusted it in this negative space because I didn't want to override the negative space once again, but I did want to add just a light fleck of something there. And I do like it. So Palladium, I will just swatch it right here because this is one shade that we didn't get to see kind of its full intensity with this eye look. It's a beautiful shade, but it is quite icy, very icy. But I'm glad that it worked with me just dusting it across the negative space, and I did kind of blend it into the inner corner of the eye. And then that was it for this eye look here. I went in and just added some black liner across the upper lash and then the lower lash, but that was it. Didn't add an inner corner highlight, just left it as is. So for this eye look, I first went in with the shade called Lucy. So this is this cooler tone taupey shade. And this shade, you really couldn't see it at all. Even when I kept trying to build it up, I felt like it looked like a matte brow bone highlight over it looking like I really applied a shade. So the shade Lucy didn't really show up against my complexion, but I will say this shade Lucy for me and complexions that are similar to mine, this would be a really nice shade to buff out a deeper shade with because it doesn't really show on our skin, but you can use it as an additional blending shade. So then I went in with the shade called Faye, and I do feel like you saw Faye more, so I added Faye right here. Faye is really nice and cool, like a really beautiful cool taupe. And so I kept it concentrated just right here in the inner corner of the eye. And so then I went in with the shade called Oz, and I took Oz and I started adding it into the crease. And I am not one that likes shimmer in my crease. And so I looked at it and I was like, this is not what I like. I didn't want this much shimmer in my crease. However, I took it and I just started to bring it along the center of the eye, kind of center outer area of the eye, and I liked that much better. So then I took the shade Maxi right here and I started to blend Maxi with Oz, and I really loved the way that those two shades blended together. I love the shift and the transition of those two shades, and it actually made Oz, in my opinion, look better along the crease area of the eye. I don't know. It looks better to me. It looks a little more grounded. So I really liked that. So then after I went in with Maxi, I took the shade Belle. So went in with this matte shade called Belle, added Belle ever so lightly, like ever so lightly. I took a fluffy brush and just dusted it in that area. So, I mean, if you look too quick, you probably can't even see it too much, but just added it ever so slightly. And then I took the shade called Flutter. Flutter is like this metallic, like, it's one of those fairy dust shades. Remember I was talking to you about that? There's a whole bunch of fairy dust shades coming out this year. So I took that and literally like just dusted it all across the center of my eye, from literally the base of my eyebrow all the way down, just dusted it all across. because I can tell that this shade Flutter, as you can see here, it doesn't have too much of a base. So you can see it right here, but it doesn't have a strong base like this shade does here. So shades like that I just call fair dust shades, okay? I love it. And then for the lower lash line, I went in with this shade called Evergreen, and that's what I used across the lower lash line. And then for the inner corner, I did take the shade Palladium, which is this shade right here, and I just added it right here, nothing intense. And I have worn both of these eye looks for a few hours, so there's been a little fading of the inner corner highlight, but added it right there. And guys, that is it for both of these eye looks. Like I said, the only shade in this palette that I didn't get a chance to use today was this shade right here called Flare. And I'll just do a quick swatch of it just so you can see it. But the formula is going to be that same metallic formula that we see for these other shades here. It's a beautiful shade. And so guys, here's the thing. Where's my wipes? And so guys, that is both, okay. And so guys, that is both of the eye looks. I just took some regular black eyeliner, added it in my tight line and in my waterline, added some mascara, and we're good to go. So here's the thing with this eyeshadow palette. I just don't feel like this eyeshadow palette is geared toward individuals who have deeper complexions. And I would even dare to say tan to deeper complexion. So here's the thing. I consider myself to fall in the tan complexion range. And these shades show up. I think for the most part, these shades look nice. However, I feel like we need just more depth, more warmth to this color story to work for complexions that fall in that tan to deeper complexion range. I think that Natasha did a great job in that these shades do not look nearly as ashy as I thought they would on my eyes. Because when I did swatches, I was like, oh, these gonna be some ashy shades. And not that the formula is ashy or chalky, just the tone of the shades. She says that we have pinks and greens and neutrals, but I do feel like this color story is leaning much more cool with the tones that she created. And so for me, I don't think this is the palette that is going to be for tan to deeper complexions. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that you can't make any of these shades work, because you can. I feel like I've made the shades work. I think both of these eye looks came out really nice. I like them. And I think if I were to wear them out in public, no one's gonna look at me and be like, your eyes look ashy. So you can make it work, but I don't feel like, actually I know this is not a palette that I'm gonna reach for, even when I do want a cooler color story, because these are just not the most complementary shades for my complexion in terms of what I like. And please, if I could draw a huge asterisk in terms of what I like and what I feel most people of color with melanated complexions would prefer. Now, if you love a cooler color story, you're gonna love this. You're gonna absolutely love this because that's what it's giving. And I think if you have a lighter to medium complexion, you can really make this palette work for you, even though the color story is a little cooler. Because you do have some shades in here, like this shade here, this shade here, this shade here, and I would say these two shades here that are a bit neutral, so they're not as cool, and you can make them work. They can give you the depth that you're looking for, and I think you can really enjoy this palette as a whole. But if you've got tan, especially if you're falling warmer on the spectrum, tan to deep, shades like these, this one, they're not going to look as complementary against your complexion, or they are gonna look ashy and stark and just not the best. So for me, I think this palette was created for lighter complexions. And like I've said before about Natasha's eyeshadow palettes, that's okay. Because one thing that I can say about her that I do feel not other brands do as consistently that she does is that Natasha will come out with a deeper palette and a lighter palette, a deeper palette and a lighter palette. And so while this one may not be for us, like my title of my video said, that's okay, because she came out with so many other palettes this year that were created for literally any and all complexions. And so I'm okay that this one is not the one that's best suited for my complexion. I felt the same way when I reviewed her mini retro palette. So this is the mini retro palette, and as you can see, I don't feel like there are any shades in the mini retro palette that you would look at and say like, oh, you know, we've got a replica here. So looking at the two side by side, I can definitely see where she was inspired by this palette to create this one, but there's no, you know, clear overt dupes, you know, even though she says that they're new shades, but you know, like they're very close. But even when I reviewed her mini retro, I remember being like, this is not gonna be my favorite, because these two shades here, although I could make them work, they were cooler. And especially when you get into like cooler toned greens and sages, sometimes cooler toned pinks, when you put them on tan complexions and deeper complexions, it can almost make the eye look bruised, and it's just not complimentary. These tones here, I could make work too, but I just didn't like the iciness that were behind them. And same with this retro glam palette. Although the shades are beautiful, palladium beautiful, but it's so icy. That's what I have right here. And it's like, okay, this works for a brown bone highlight, but it's definitely not a shade that I'm gonna reach for all the time. And it's also not gonna be a shade that I'm gonna reach for in my like go-to looks, because it's not gonna be as complimentary. Now, looking at her glam palette, we're not looking at this palette like to find comparison shades, but I think why this palette works so well for everyone is because we have depth to the shades. So even though this palette is more cool, we have neutral tones in it, we have a couple of warm tones, but even with the shades that are cooler, you know, outside of like these two shades here, the rest of these shades have depth to them. So regardless of your complexion and almost regardless of your undertone, basically everybody can make this palette work, and that's why I think this palette was loved by so many. So to me, this retro glam palette, I think it is a beautiful color story, but what would have made this palette work for everybody is adding, if she took the exact same shades, but they had depth to them and like a tinge more warmth to them to make them truly neutral instead of so cool, this palette could work. Now, what I will tell you is this. I am looking forward to receiving Mel's memory bundle. So I did order that from Sydney Grace, and the color story of Mel's palette and Natasha's retro glam palette is very similar. But I feel like Mel's bundle is gonna have that warmth that is needed so that it can work really well for all complexions. That's just a hypothesis. I don't know yet. I will definitely let you know that conclusion when I get the bundle. But that is my assumption, that Mel's memory bundle is going to be more suited for all complexions, whereas I think Natasha's retro glam palette is best suited for lighter to medium complexions. So you guys let me know your thoughts down below. Like I said, I do think this is a beautiful palette, and in terms of formula, most definitely would recommend it. Like nothing was missing from the formula. I didn't look at any of these shades and go like, ugh, this is lackluster. It's a beautiful color story. It's a beautiful palette. I would recommend it. So let me know your thoughts down below. What do you think of the two eye looks that I created? What do you think of the palette? Do you like the palette? If you already have it, is this a palette that you're gonna pick up? You know, I wanna hear all your thoughts down below. And if you've made it to this point in the video and you haven't yet to subscribe to my channel, I would love for you to consider subscribing and joining the Glam Girl Squad. And guys, that is it. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope to see you in my very next video. Bye guys.